Now, there's not that much doubt about the first 2 points that I've covered so far, that teen employment has declined dramatically, and there does seem to be a significant problem with these kids not working, especially those who don't go on to college. But the third point, I think, is going to be the one where we need the most discussion or would be the more contentious. We find that there is good evidence that immigration accounts for a significant share, but by no means all, of the decline in teenage summer labor force participation. Between 1994 and 2007, the number of immigrants, legal and illegal, holding a job grew dramatically to 23.2 million by 2007. That's the total immigrant workforce in the United States. Over this time, about 1 million green cards, that's permanent immigration, were issued each year on average. So we have over 1 million or roughly 1 million people getting their green card each year. That allows you to stay permanently and eventually become a citizen if you like. Now, the total illegal population is reckoned to have roughly doubled in size over this period as well, from maybe roughly 6 million or 5 million to 11 or 12 million. The total number of people allowed in under the H-2B program, which is for seasonal, non-agricultural workers who are unskilled, was about 900,000. We also allowed in 25,000 people over this period for the Q1 visa. That is often referred to as the Disney visa for people to work at theme parks and unskilled jobs on a seasonal basis. We've also allowed in several million people, about 4 million, on J visas. Very roughly about 2/3 of that 4 million are workers. They're the people you see down at the beach resorts, being waiters and busboys. They come in as au pairs and other jobs that don't require a lot of education, childcare, hotel and restaurant work, that sort of thing. So immigration, without question, has been very high over this period, and it's been running at record levels, and that's why the numbers are so big in total. So there's no question that teens are working less, and there's no question that over that time period, there were many more immigrants in the labor market. Immigration dramatically increased the supply of workers. Now, there's also very little question that U.S.-born teenagers and immigrants often do the same kinds of jobs. We look at that in our report to some extent, but let me just give you one statistic. If we look at the 15 jobs that teenagers do the most, where are they mostly concentrated? This makes up about 60% of teenagers. We find that about 1 out of 5 workers, a little more, is an immigrant. In other words, in the 15 top teenage occupations, about 1 out of 5 workers is also an immigrant. So there are a lot of immigrants in high teenage jobs. And these include things like retail salesperson, waitress, stock handler, cook, construction laborer, food preparation worker, just exactly the things you might expect. Now, comparisons over time between 1994 and 2007 show that in those occupations where immigrants made the biggest gains, teenagers tended to have the biggest losses. We also find that when we look at the 10 states where immigrants are the largest share of workers, just 45% of U.S.-born teenagers were in the labor market in 2007, whereas in the 10 lowest immigration states, 58% were in the labor market. And so that's a big difference. In other words, in high immigration states, 45% of the teenagers were working or looking for work. In the low immigration states, 58% were. So that's certainly suggestive that there's an impact from having large-scale immigration in those states. Now, we also run a series of regressions. I won't run through all those numbers. When we do that, we also find, comparing differences between 94 and 2007, that for each 10% percentage point increase in the immigrant share of a state's immigrant population, or share of the workforce, I should say, there was about an 8 percentage point decline in the share of teenagers in the labor force. Now, this is a big effect. In other words, if the immigrant share of workers went from 10 to 20%, the results imply that the share of American teenagers holding a job would decline by almost 8 percentage points in response. So this is a big effect, but it also indicates it's not the only factor that's affecting teenage employment. I should point out our results are similar to two studies, or two relatively recent studies, one by the Federal Reserve entitled The Impact of Low-Skilled Immigration on Youth Labor Market, that was just published recently. It's a working paper, and it's also consistent with research done by Andrew Sum and his colleagues at Northeastern University. Now, there's several reasons why immigrants might displace natives in the labor market when they do the same kinds of jobs. There are several possibilities, and we can talk about them maybe in the question and answer period, but let me just say that I think the number one reason is simply that the immigrants are overwhelmingly adults, the teenagers are not. If we look again at those top teenage occupations, the vast majority of immigrants doing that work are adults. Only 5%, or put a different way, 95% of the immigrants in the big teenage occupations are over the age of 20. And it's probably very difficult for a 17-year-old American to compete with a 28-year-old immigrant. It kind of makes sense. And so I think this is likely to give them a significant advantage in the labor market. I see my time is running out, or may have already run out, so I'll try to sum things up very quickly. In this report, Karen and I, again, came to three conclusions. First, labor market for participation of teenagers, American teenagers, has declined dramatically. Second, this is a cause for concern for these kids. There are real-world consequences later in life for them, particularly those who don't go on to college. And third, immigration explains a significant share of this decline, but certainly not all of it. So in conclusion, I would say the decision to allow in large numbers of legal immigrants, temporary and permanent, and to tolerate large-scale illegal immigration, and to turn away from employing American teenagers may well be seen as desirable by some businesses. However, this policy choice almost certainly has significant long-term consequences. As non-work and idleness become the norm for more Americans after they leave their teenage years, there may be significant negative effects not just for these individuals, but also for the larger society. The potential impact of large-scale immigration on teenagers is something that we should consider when formulating immigration policy in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.